Now we get into the verses. First one, let me just quickly tell you this. We need to rise up and build because the need is great. We need to rise up and build because the burden is great. We need to rise up and build because our God is great. In verses 1 to 3, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. Here was Nehemiah asking Hanani, his brother, and some other men about the people of God and the city of God. Jerusalem is a place of the name of God. And he was questioning them, asking them of the people of God. One of the things I want you to focus through and follow me as I go through this passage is, what kind of a person is Nehemiah? Nehemiah is a person who in his heart carried the people of God. Nehemiah was a person who carried the name of God. Nehemiah was a person who carried the purposes of God. And so he questioned them. He questioned them about the people of God, the city of God. And the answer that he received, verse 3, they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. One translation says, they are in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. Before we rise up and build, we need to recognize the need. And the need is this, that walls have been broken, gates have been burned with fire. There is great distress and reproach. It is not a very pretty sight. It is a very dismal picture. Things are not good, says the Living Bible. What do broken walls represent? Now, if you look historically, you need to go back to 2 Chronicles 36 and see how Nebuchadnezzar had actually destroyed Jerusalem. And then later, we find that when Ezra, or first Zerubbabel, when they brought the exiles back in the first coming back to Jerusalem, and then subsequently Ezra, and you read that in Ezra 4, how they wanted to rebuild the walls, but they were stopped. And so that is the historical background. The temple had been rebuilt somewhat, but the walls have not been rebuilt. Now, in that context comes Nehemiah. Now, why is this so important? Now, for the Jews, the temple is a very important place because that is where they will offer the sacrifice of atonement every year. And if they don't have the temple, then they will not be able to atone their sins, and therefore they will be walking with the wrath of God upon their heads, as it were. And so, when the temple has been built, but the walls were still broken, that means they are still defenseless, and that means they are open to attack, they are open to intrusion, open for the temple to be attacked and destroyed again. And so they lived under great stress, they lived under great fear, they lived under great insecurity, they lived with great sense of inferiority. They were defenseless. Now, if you leave the broken walls as they are, they will not remain the same, but rather they will grow worse. In fact, there is a social theory which says that problems, if not dealt with as soon as they occur, they become much more worse than they would otherwise be. Let me rephrase that again. Problems, if not dealt with as soon as they occur, they become much more worse than they would otherwise be. In fact, they call this the broken window theory. What they mean is that in a street, in a house, if the windows have been broken, then the image or the message that is coming across is that no one is taking care of it, of this place, and no one cares, and no one is in charge, and therefore will attract bad elements into that vicinity and into that place, and the place will begin to deteriorate. Now, you and I would have seen this. If you have seen an abandoned car somewhere along the road, and if you pass by every day, the first day you see the whole car intact. Then a few days later you see the tires missing. And then you see the engine missing. And then you see all the seats are missing, and one day the whole vehicle is missing. So when broken windows or broken walls or ruins are not corrected, are not mended, they will become even worse. We need to recognize the need. The wall was broken and the gates were burned with fire. What does this mean for us? You know, the wall in Scripture refers to the wall of salvation. In fact, wall speaks about three things. It talks about security, it talks about perspective, and it talks about witness. And those of you who have watched The Lord of the Rings, you see many walled cities. You see the city, and the walls give identity. The wall gives security. The walls gives protection. At the same time, the walls are sometimes the highest points from which they'll be able to see whether the enemies are coming on the horizon. At the same time, able to see the condition of the people within the walls. And the walls also speak of a testimony, of a witness. In fact, it has been said that in those days, if they had won a battle, they would put all those the people whom they have killed on the wall. So when they see this, they said, wow, this is a very powerful city. It speaks about security, it speaks about perspective, it speaks about witness. But more importantly, the wall speaks about wall of salvation. In Isaiah 26 and Isaiah 60, verse 18, speaks about where the people sing that our city is a strong city and our walls are walls of salvation. God is the wall of salvation around us. Now, salvation is a very all-embracing word, and it has got many facets of well-being, spiritual well-being. Without giving you the references, let me just say this. Salvation could also mean peace with God. It means being right with God. It means being united with God. It means being presence with Christ or presence of Christ. Let me just stop for a while. So when we say that the wall of salvation would mean the peace with God and being right with God, and when we say the walls are broken, that means we have broken peace with God. And if we say the wall of salvation is broken, that means being right with God is broken. And he speaks about the presence of God, the presence of Christ. Then when we say the wall of salvation is broken, that means we have lost the presence of God in our lives. Salvation also means moral purity. Salvation also means integrity. And so when walls are broken, then moral purity is broken, integrity is broken. Salvation also means that we will be instruments of salvation, meaning sharing the gospel with others. But if we ourselves are broken, we don't become means of becoming blessing. Faith also means wall of salvation. But if faith is no more there, then the wall lies broken. Reverence for God, humility, fellowship, compassion, and encouragement all speak about salvation. But if the fear of God is broken, if the humility of God, humility of ourselves is broken before God, and if fellowship with God and fellowship with one another is broken, when the compassion of God in our hearts is broken, when encouragement in our hearts is broken, then we are ruined walls and broken walls. We need to recognize the need. The need because the walls have been broken. Secondly, we need to feel the burden. In verse 4 it says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I moaned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Now this is a very interesting and a very Eastern way of describing that when you are in great distress, when you are in great sorrow, they will sit down. I remember many years ago, my brother-in-law was pastoring a church in Sarawak, called me one night. And he said, I've got some news for you. It's not very good, but tell me, are you standing or sitting down? He asked me. I said, I'm standing. He said, would you sit down? This is the very church that we worked together and we actually planted. And he told me of that news where the church had gone through a split that very night. So sometimes when the sorrow is so great, when the distress of the soul is so great, you sit down. And here was Nehemiah who sat down and wept. who sat down and moaned, who sat down and fasted for days. The burden was great. The pain was great. Now, it's one thing to see ruined walls. It's one thing to see broken walls. It's one thing to see rubble, but it's another thing to feel it. It is one thing to see trying to do evangelism and no results, absolutely no results. It's another thing to feel that disappointment and that dejection. It is one thing to see, to pray for a person to be healed, and when the person is not healed, it is another thing to feel that dejection and that disappointment. And here was Nehemiah. He felt that pain. Now, sometimes if you and I are honest, we see ruins, but we don't feel it. If you and I are honest, when we see broken lives, we see them, but we don't feel them. But it was Ellen Redpath who said, "You never lighten the load unless first you have felt the pressure in your own soul." Unless you have felt that pressure in your own soul. What is it about Nehemiah that he should feel this way, weep this way, mourn this way, fast this way? What is it about him that he should cry and weep? These are the things that would break our hearts. Damaged lives would break our hearts. Defeated lives would break our hearts. Discouragement would break our hearts. Dejection and despondent lives will break our hearts. Distressed souls will break our hearts. We need to feel the pain. We need to feel the pain. And the only way to feel the pain is when we are engaged in it. When we carry the purposes of God. When you carry the people of God in your lives. In fact, somebody had said it in one author. It is as if he lost something. It is as if he is going through bereavement. It is so easy to cry when someone dies. Something died in Nehemiah. Something died. And he has to process this burden before the Lord. Note, he said that he cried and wept before the God of heaven. Now, sometimes when these ruins that we see, the rubble that we see, if you do not process it before God, you can turn bitter, not broken. If you do not process this dejection, this despondency within our souls before God, then instead of mourning, we will be mocking. Instead of being broken, we will be angry. But when we come and bring that before God, it is God who takes and burdens us. In fact, I think one of the reasons why he sat before God, God began to speak into his own heart. And I think a point had come, he began to feel his own heart. The heart of God. I do not know in your own spiritual life, whether you have walked the streets of Kuala Lumpur, or you have walked the streets of some village in Sarawak or Sabah, or you have seen the faces of the people of the unreached people group, or you have walked down the squatters areas in Pantai Dalam and have seen their faces. And for you it may be just a sea of faces, but somewhere along the line the Spirit of God begins to arrest you and break your heart. It is the Spirit of God that will break your heart and give you that burden. And then we move on, where it says that for many days he was having this burden. And then in verse 5 he says, "Then I said," and the rest of it was prayer.